Today, we're going to talk about something that feels almost radical in a moment like this: hope. Not the cheap kind, not the motivational poster kind, the real kind. The kind that shows up when you have every reason to believe the game is fixed, the system is rotten, and the bad guys always walk away with the trophy. And here is the promise I want to make you right at the top. By the end of this episode, I want you to feel it in your chest that you are not a spectator to this world. You are a participant, and what you do actually matters. Greetings, dear listeners, and welcome back to Diplomacy and Discourse Podcast. I'm your host, AR, and it's a genuine pleasure to have you with us today. We live in cynical times. You can feel it in the way people talk about politics, about institutions, about the future. Corruption is assumed. Accountability is rare. And when something goes wrong, the default explanation is that someone powerful wanted it that way. That cynicism is not entirely wrong. A lot of the time, the world really does look rigged. But every so often, something happens that punches a hole in that story. Something that reminds us that merit, courage, and integrity can still win, even when the deck is stacked. Hold on to that, because that hole in the story is a door, and you can walk through it. On July 19th, 2026, Spain beat Argentina 1-0 in the FIFA World Cup final at MetLife Stadium. On paper, that is a sports result. In the streets, on social media, and in living rooms around the world, it became something else entirely. One creator put it as plainly as anyone could: it was not just a soccer game. It was a metaphor. It was hope. Today, we unpack why that victory landed the way it did, as a story about good triumphing over evil, about standing on principle, and about why the next generation still gives us reason to believe. More than that, we are going to talk about what you do with a story like this, because a moment of hope you only feel is a moment wasted. But a moment of hope you act on can change the trajectory of a life, of a community, of a cause. So settle in and let us find the fuel in this together. To understand why Spain's win felt so charged, you have to start with the atmosphere around this World Cup. Fairly or not, a huge portion of the global audience walked into the final convinced that FIFA wanted a very specific ending. They wanted Argentina. They wanted Lionel Messi to ride into the sunset with one last World Cup trophy. That narrative was everywhere. In fan forums, in commentary, in the raw frustration pouring out of social media after questionable calls throughout the tournament. FIFA has spent years earning that distrust. The organization and its president, Gianni Infantino, have been dodged by corruption scandals, opaque decision-making, and a reputation for protecting power over protecting the game. This tournament did little to repair that image. Ticket prices soared into the thousands, shutting ordinary fans out. Teams faced administrative barriers and visa headaches. And on the pitch, critics pointed to egregious refereeing decisions that seemed to tilt, again and again, toward the story FIFA allegedly preferred. Here's why this matters beyond sports. When people watch a World Cup and conclude that the outcome is being managed, they are not only talking about soccer. They are talking about every institution that claims to be fair while behaving as if fairness is optional. The speaker in the video that inspired this episode put it bluntly: no matter how badly a change is needed, it never actually happens. That line hits because it is how a lot of people feel about politics, about justice systems, about international law. The powerful protect the powerful. The rest of us are told to trust the process. So when Argentina walked into that final as the sentimental favorite of the establishment, many viewers were not just watching a match. They were watching a test. Would the better team be allowed to win? And here is what I want you to hold on to as we go. The fact that a rigged game makes you angry is not a weakness. It is a signal. That anger is your sense of justice still working, refusing to go numb. Do not apologize for it. Channel it. The people who change things are almost always the ones who refused to accept that is just how it is, as the final word. And then Spain won. Not on penalties, not on a fluke deflection in extra time. They won 1-0 in a final where, to a huge share of neutral observers, they were simply the better team. They played with control, discipline, and the kind of collective intelligence that makes football look like chess at a sprint. They knew the environment was hostile. They knew the calls might not go their way, and they persevered anyway. Sit with that for a second because this is the whole ball game. They did not wait for the perfect conditions to give it their best. They gave their best because the conditions were imperfect. That is a choice available to you too, in your work, in your community, in whatever arena you have been told is stacked against you. You do not need a fair field to start. You need to decide to play like the champions on the field you have got. That word, persevered, is doing a lot of work here. Spain did not get a clean, neutral final in some idealized sporting universe. They played inside a system many believed was working against them. As one passionate observer put it, they played by the dirty rules and they still won. That is the heart of the metaphor. Good does not always get a fair arena. Sometimes the good guys have to win on a tilted field, under biased officials, with the institution rooting for the other story. And sometimes, rarely precious when it happens, they do. There is a detail from that retraction that stuck with me. The speaker argued that if the match had gone to penalty kicks, Argentina would likely have won, and the whole tournament would have felt like more fixed nonsense. A script completed on schedule. Spain refusing to let it get there, closing it out in a little bit of extra time, felt like slamming a door on the predetermined ending. Merit interrupted the narrative. In a world where people have internalized the idea that the good guy never wins and the bad guy always comes out on top, that interruption lands on something close to poetic justice. Beautiful, hopeful, almost righteous. Spain's victory became a stand in for every underdog who has ever been told the system cannot be beaten, and then beat it anyway. This shows us something you can carry into your own life. The predetermined ending only holds power over you as long as you believe it is already written. Spain wrote a different one in real time. If they could refuse the script on the biggest stage in the world, so can you refuse the script that says your effort is pointless. Show up, prepare, close the door on the ending they expected you to accept. Winning on the field was only half the story. What happened after the final whistle may have said even more about the kind of hope people were hungry for. At the trophy presentation at MetLife Stadium, Donald Trump, the sitting US president and a host nation figure for the tournament, tried to insert himself into Spain's team photo. The Spanish players did something uniquely extraordinary. They waited. They did not make a scene. They did not give a speech. They simply held their ground until Trump was guided away by FIFA President Infantino. And only then did they take their official photograph. The message, as Javier Bardem later summarized with pride, was simple. No, we have to make the picture without you. Think about that gesture required. These are athletes at the peak of their career-defining moment. The cameras are everywhere. The pressure to smile, pose, and play along with power is enormous. A photo with a head of state is usually treated as non-negotiable protocol. And yet, the team collectively chose principle over pageantry. They refused to let their triumph be absorbed into someone else's political theater. And that is courage of a particular kind. Not the courage of dramatic confrontation, but the courage of the boundary. In diplomacy, in activism, in ordinary life, a huge amount of moral work is done not by grand speeches, but by the quiet decision not to participate in something that compromises you. Spain's players drew a line. For millions watching, that refusal was as hopeful as the goal that won the cup. It suggested that success and integrity are not opposites. You can win and still stand for something. And you do not need a World Cup to practice this. You can draw that same line tomorrow, in the meeting where everyone stays quiet, in the group chat where the easy laugh comes at someone's expense, in the moment when going along would be smoother than standing firm. The courage of the boundary is not reserved for famous people in bright stadiums. It is available to you in ordinary rooms every single day. Every time you use it, you make it a little more normal for the next person to use theirs. Of course, sports never stay only sports, especially not a World Cup final between two nations whose governments sit on opposite sides of one of the most painful conflicts on earth. In a Zateo interview with journalist Mehdi Hassan, Spanish actor and activist Javier Bardem said something many people were already feeling. In many ways, this Argentina Spain final was almost a proxy for Israel versus Palestine, rightly or wrongly. That framing is uncomfortable, and Bardem himself flagged the rightly or wrongly. National teams are not their governments. Players are not policymakers. Conflating a jersey with a foreign ministry is unfair to the athletes and to ordinary citizens on both sides. And yet, Argentina's president, Javier Milei, has been a staunch ally of Benjamin Netanyahu's government, including a highly symbolic shift in Argentina's embassy posture toward Jerusalem. Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sanchez has been one of the most vocal European critics of Israel's campaign in Gaza. Spain formally recognized Palestine in 2024 and joined South Africa's case at the International Court of Justice alleging genocide. When the heads of state take positions that stark, fans inevitably load matches with meaning the players never asked to carry. In the interview, Bardem was careful to separate people from leaders. Milei does not represent every Argentine. Trump does not represent every American. Criticizing the Israeli government is not anti Semitism, and condemning the killings of civilians is not a team sport. He called the situation in Gaza a full genocide, documented as such, named Netanyahu a war criminal, and in the same breath insisted that those who committed crimes on the other side, including Hamas, should face justice too. There is no reason, he said, to kill innocent civilians anywhere in the world. So the geopolitical layer does not turn Spain into saints and Argentina into villains. What it does is explain why the emotional temperature of this final was so high. For many viewers, Spain's government has taken a moral risk most European leaders avoided. Bardem called much of Europe's political class syncopanthic, too willing to bend the knee to great power interests. When Spain then won on the pitch and snubbed a photo with Trump off of it, the symbolism stacked. Merit, principle. A government that had broken with the pack on human rights. No wonder it felt larger than football. And notice the lesson buried in there for the rest of us. Someone had to be the first to break with the pack. And it is almost never the comfortable move. But being first gives everyone else permission to be second. That is how courage spreads. One person, one team, one government willing to absorb the awkwardness so the next one does not have to. You can be that first voice in your own circle. It costs something. It is also exactly how the pack starts to change direction. If the match gave people a jolt of present tense hope, Bardem pointed to where the longer hope lives, in the young. He talked about a generation watching the World Cup with what he called new brown eyes. Eyes not yet infected by the old stories, the old excuses, the old narratives that teach us to look away. That image is worth sitting with. So much of political cynicism is inherited. We learn which injustices are complicated, which victims are inconvenient, which powerful friends must not be offended. Young people, Bardem suggested, are less fluent in that corrupted language. They see a destroyed neighborhood, a dead child, a rigged institution, and they have not yet been trained to explain it away. That does not make the youth automatically wise. It does make them a moral early warning system. They are the first to name what older generations have learned to tolerate. And when they fill streets, timelines, and stadiums with that clarity, they drag the rest of us back toward accountability. Bardem's line captures the ethic underneath. There can be no peace without justice, and no justice without accountability. Hope, in this framing, is not a bet that the world is secretly kind. It is a bet that uncorrupted visions still exist. that each generation produces people who refuse to accept that cruelty is inevitable and corruption is just how things work. So, here's a challenge for you. Whatever your age, guard your clear vision like it is treasure, because it is. Do not let the world train the shock out of you. When something is wrong, let yourself say it is wrong, plainly, before you have talked yourself into all the reasons to look away. That clarity is not naive. It is the raw material of every reform that has ever happened. If the young can still see clearly, so can you decide, today, to stop explaining away the things that should never be normal. Is it fair to ask whether we are overreading a soccer game? Maybe it was just a final. Maybe the refs were imperfect, not conspiratorial. Maybe the Trump snub was awkward logistics more than political manifesto. Healthy skepticism is part of serious analysis. But here is why the metaphor still matters. People needed this story. In a stretch of history crowded with civilian suffering, institutional failure, and leaders insulated from consequence, a clean moment of earned victory felt like oxygen. Hope is not naive because it celebrates a football match. Hope is naive only when it pretends structural evil will collapse on its own. What Spain's win offered was different. Evidence that persistence inside a flawed system can still produce a just result. That distinction is everything. If you believe the system is fully sealed, that outcomes are always purchased, then participation becomes pointless and cynicism becomes a personality. But if you believe the system is biased yet beatable, then effort still means something. Spain did not burn the rulebook. They mastered the game under hostile conditions and forced the result through excellence. That is a template that travels well beyond sports. Organize better, prepare harder, refuse the premature surrender that corruption is counting on. Listen to that last part twice. Refuse the premature surrender that corruption is counting on. Because it is the most important sentence in this whole episode. Corruption is not just counting on being strong, it is counting on you giving up early. It wins most of its victories before the fight even starts, simply by convincing good people that trying is pointless. So the single most defiant, hopeful thing you can do is to not quit before you have begun. Pick up the cause that keeps you up at night and take one concrete step toward it this week. One email, one conversation, 1 hour, $1, 1 vote. Actionable hope is a verb. Small victories matter for the same reason. They do not fix FIFA. They do not end a war. They do not clean out every captured institution. What they do is keep alive the muscle memory of winning. Societies that forget what justice feels like stop demanding it. Societies that occasionally taste it remember the standard. A World Cup lifted by the team that earned it. A photo taken without the politician who demanded inclusion. A generation still capable of moral shock. These are not the end of the story. They are proof the story is not over. And meaning shows up in unexpected places. Diplomacy and discourse are not only what happens in ministries. They are also the symbols publics rally around when formal politics feels bankrupt. And you are part of the public. The muscle memory of winning does not build itself. It is built by people who keep stacking small victories until the momentum becomes undeniable. Your small victories count. The habits you refuse to break. The standards you refuse to lower. The neighbor you refuse to abandon. That is you keeping the muscle memory alive. Never let anyone convince you the small stuff is too small to matter. It is precisely the small stuff, done by enough people, that the big stuff is made of. Spain's victory will be remembered by some as a great football story. Full stop. Fair enough, though. For others, including the voices that shaped this episode, it will be remembered as a reminder. The fixed ending is not always fixed. The better side can still prevail. Principle can still interrupt the ceremony. Young eyes can still see clearly. Hope, if it is going to survive contact with the real world, has to be disciplined rather than a mood. Moods evaporate when the next scandal breaks. Discipline means continuing to act as if integrity matters, even when the evidence is mixed. It means celebrating legitimate wins without pretending the war is over. It means holding two truths at once. The system is often rigged, and the rigging is not omnipotent. And if it is not omnipotent, then there is a gap. And in that gap is where you get to work. Discipline is a decision you make again every morning, whether or not you feel like it, whether or not you can see the finish line. That is good news, because it means hope is not something you have to wait to receive. It is something you can generate, starting today. Good triumphing over evil is not a fairy tale that happens while we watch. It is a result produced by people who prepare, who endure biased conditions, who refuse the photo, who recognize Palestine, or file the ICJ brief, or tell the truth when it would be easier to just stay quiet. Spain did not save the world on a Sunday in New Jersey. They did something more modest and more useful. They gave a cynical planet a usable memory of what it looks like when merit and courage get the last word. Now the question turns to you. What memory will you give the people around you? Whose picture will you refuse to be in? What line will you draw? What steps will you take? What truth will say out loud when silence would be easier? You do not have to win a World Cup. You just have to decide that good is worth showing up for, and then keep showing up. Because a world full of ordinary people who refuse to quit on what is right is exactly how evil finally runs out of the room. So as we leave this episode, I will borrow the spirit of that raw, hopeful reaction that started this whole conversation. For all that is bad in the world, and there is plenty, it was hopeful. Not because the darkness left, because for one bright, stubborn moment, it did not win. And if darkness can be beaten for one moment, it can be beaten for another and another. Every time someone like you decides to be the reason it does not win today. As we draw the curtains on this episode, thank you for listening, for thinking, and for staying open to meaning in unlikely places. If this conversation resonated with you, do not just feel it, use it. Share it with someone who needs the reminder. Challenge it where you disagree. And then go do one thing today that puts a little more good into the world. You have more power than the cynics want you to believe. So until next time, take care, keep your eyes clear, keep your courage close, and go be the reason someone else finds hope. This is Diplomacy and Discourse, and the fields may be tilted, but the game is still ours to win.